Back on Morning Line, it's our final segment with John Harris, Tennessee Firearms Association. And, as earlier I was mentioning what type of weapon I would like for my birthday, John, which would be a .44 Magnum. And it just came to mind because recently I was watching the Clint Eastwood classic Magnum Force. There's a number of them, and I'm just curious. It's interesting. When those films came out with Clint Eastwood, and that was, I think, back in the 1970s, and that type of weapon, and to this day, because of it, that weapon holds a mystique in my head where he says, this being the most powerful handgun in the world. I know guns have evolved. I'm just wondering, tell me a little about the .44 Magnum in your mind from back then, and if it still holds the allure that it did then, or are there new weapons that have kind of taken on that mystique in our pop culture these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very true because there's been a lot of evolution in ballistics and firearms development. And when you go as I'm a licensed instructor, although I don't do a lot of tactical instructing, but I'm involved in a lot of classes because I come in as a lecturer on civilian deadly force, for example. And you very seldom see the .44 Magnums. You do some. Self-defense or carry preparedness classes for a couple of reasons. One is it's a large gun, it's a large frame gun, and it's only got 6 rounds typically. So what you more commonly see by far are the 9mm, and then from that you see 45s and 40 calibers and 380s, but the 9mm is probably the most common. And part of the reason is if you look at the development, the science of ballistics, the ballistics on a modern, 2020 edition 9mm, and the FBI has adopted it as their preferred round now because of this, it is so phenomenal that when you couple the 9mm individual ballistics capacity with the fact that the guns that carry it can often carry 13, 15, 17 rounds as opposed to 6, you don't see the .44 Magnum. Yeah, you're right. It might be able to take down an oak tree with 1 round, but for everyday carry, for size and firepower in terms of repeated rounds, it's not what people are using substantially, particularly for everyday carry.
Yeah, it's just not reasonable anymore. And you're right. Again, I know that's Hollywood and the movies and the like, because I remember Clint would talk about in the movie, well, I've seen, a smaller caliber ricochet off a windshield, but a .44 Magnum round's going to go right through it and hit what you're shooting at.
Oh, yeah. A lot of that's Hollywood because they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. That's what I figured. All right, and that's about guns. The ballistics, you were talking about that. I'm curious, too, just what we see out there now with regard to the bullets themselves. And I wanted to ask you this. So often when we cover a story in the morning and you see it was a shooting overnight, and you can see the markers in the street where clearly those markers they put down are likely where the shell casings have landed. Is it possible to lift a print off a shell casing, maybe from one of these weapons? And what are the odds that there would be a print on one of those if it was fired from a gun? Which guns actually release the shell casing and which ones keep the casing still in the weapon?
Well, the semi-automatics, like the Glocks that we see the law enforcement carry so much, almost uniformly eject each cell as they're fired. That's how they become a semi-automatic and reload the next round. Whereas the revolver, like the Clint Eastwood .44 Magnum, the rounds, the empty shells, casings stay in the cylinder until they're manually ejected by the shooter. So if you have a robbery, and there's no shell casings laying about, it's probably the person had a revolver. If there's shell casings spread everywhere, they're probably almost certainly carrying a semi-automatic.
And you could probably lift a print off one of them if there was one on there?
It just depends on how it was loaded. If they put on gloves, because you don't really, depending on how it's done, have to manually handle each round.
Right.
They're automatic loaders.
Right.
So it just depends on whether or not the shooter touched them.
Gotcha. Real quick, let's squeeze in Thomas here. Thomas, go ahead. Do you have a question, Thomas?
Hey, good morning, Nick. How you doing?
Good. What's up, buddy?
I'd like to ask your buddy there a question.
Yeah.
If the Second Amendment was taken away, and if they cut it out, and they took everybody's guns away, would you not think this country would become a communist country because no one could defend themselves or take care of themselves?
We just have a couple minutes. Boy, that's a whole topic for another show, getting into all of that, I suppose. I do, though, John.
And let me say this.
Go for it, yeah.
Keep in mind that the Second Amendment was written in the late 1700s at a time when our nation had just taken up arms against its leader, King George, and with force of arms seized freedom and liberty as 13 separate colonies from its prior governing body. The Second Amendment is not about hunting, and it's not even about everyday carry or personal defense. There is Supreme Court case after Supreme Court case, including 2 in Tennessee, that specifically say that the arms within the constitutional meaning of the Second Amendment are those suitable for modern military engagements. You can look at the State versus Amet, State versus Andrews, and U.S. versus Miller, and that terminology is in all 3 of those Supreme Court decisions.
Very interesting. The thing about it, John, is, and I understand the militias, and you make a great historical statement there, but I do kind of chuckle sometimes when I hear folks, and I understand that if ever our government chose to come after you, if you had a gun, you could do your best. Have fun with that when the Harrier is right above your house. I mean, let's be realistic here. We talk about U.S. citizens defending themselves against the country. If the military or one of those F-16s that flies over a Titans game is coming for you, I don't care what kind of weapon you have, you're going down.
Well, that's true. That's true on an individual basis, but it's the same phenomenon that Japan realized, at least according to the movie Tora, 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 in the 1940s, is that one of their biggest fears was not that an individual might, react to their Zero fighters with a deer rifle, but that the mass of U.S. citizens would respond in overwhelming numbers, even if they didn't have superior firepower.
Yeah, and that's the trick, numbers and superior numbers. John, always an education. Fun conversation today, and I really appreciate you joining us. We'll talk again sometime soon, my friend, all right?
Thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Take care of yourself. I'll be back with a programming note right after this.